Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by the great Paul Lucart, managing principal of PL Programs. And also, you probably see him around on your LinkedIn feed as well with some great, really insightful operation tips and insights and diving into the industry in a deep way. So very excited to get him on the podcast, talk about his background, what he does with PL programs, and some of the projects he's worked on, and some of the other little projects he's coming up with now too, and his books as well. So, Paul, welcome to the show. How are you?
Oh, very kind. I'm doing great, Kevin, and thank you for having me. And likewise, you've got a ton of interesting stuff going on, so it's really cool to be here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And definitely happy to get you on and dive into this. So why don't we, I guess, learn a little bit more about you? Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the ops and warehousing world, and how you came to start your company now, PL Programs.
Sure. And so, yeah, and this will all kind of end up with today. So starting from the beginning, grew up in Bakersfield, California, which will come to play in a little later part of the story.
Okay.
And getting out of high school, I went to the military academy, and out of the military academy, I spent 5 years in the army. So I spent some time in the infantry and the intelligence, and that was really, if you want to think about it, maybe the first operations experience
Mm,
that I had.
okay.
It's very sort of tangible, get things done type of culture, working with teams, and that really set the stage for, oh, I kind of like doing this thing. I know how to do this. I know how to work with people and solve these types of problems. And so getting out of the army, I was looking for a job, and I
Mm,
was thinking about Target, and I was thinking about Target retail specifically until I met through a friend of a friend the site manager for TO 593 out in Shafter, California, which is a Target distribution center out
okay.
at right outside of Bakersfield. And he said, "You don't want to go to the retail side. You have to wear the red shirt and wear the khakis and talk with the customers. Like, you come out with us, move the
Mm,
boxes. It's really cool. It's a great place to be." And so he was a really great guy, a guy named Mike Bellich. I think he's at Crate and Barrel now. And
okay.
so I went out and started working as a supervisor in the Target warehouse. And that was really the first taste of the warehouse operations, the distribution and retail ops. So after I did that for a little bit, I went and got the MBA and then went to Amazon as a operations manager. So right back, you
Mm,
know, skipping the whole, consulting or finance or things like that, but went right back into operations with Amazon.
mm,
Spent some time out at the Reno Fernley facility, which is now closed, as an inventory control ops manager, and then a little bit of
very
time.
nice. Okay. I like that. That's my background too, right?
Oh
Inventory
yeah,
control. Yeah.
yeah, it was really fascinating. And Amazon had some really sophisticated. So I got to see kind of the whole operations of the building, right? Like, what are you doing for quality throughout, from receiving through picking, through some of the reverse logistics, which I thought was a nice like overview of ops. So it's not quite the
Mm,
same as running your 100-person picking shift in the morning, but you do get to see a lot of the processes and how they and how they contribute to the output that the actual customer gets at the
right.
end. So it was a really good experience, and learned a lot about quality, and then the first class kind of lean mindset that Amazon brings to operations. And more broadly, that was really my first exposure to like lean as lean, because they were going
Mm,
through a lot of, you tape everything up and you worry about the tack time for the orders and so on. So that was really informative and informative experience. After that, I took a little bit of a flyer and I joined a little 3PL called RailX, which was doing rail transportation from California to the East Coast. They did a
okay.
lot of produce by rail, so you're packing oranges and onions and wine and cantaloupes and all sorts of things into rail cars. So if you've ever seen a cubed out rail car and tried to unload one, it's pretty intense operation. A lot of uncertainty in transportation times,
Mm,
and I got some multimodal experience dealing with rail, dealing with more with trucking, and I helped start up their Florida terminal and warehouse. So after that was out in Jacksonville, Florida. So after Jacksonville, they
okay.
asked me to come up and run their site, their flagship site up near Rotterdam, New York. So that was
Mm,
probably 250,000 square foot. That was most of their operations, and that distributed produce throughout most of the eastern seaboard, including New York City, including Pennsylvania, and all up and down the coast. So really cool. That was my first, maybe not the first, but the first. The Florida facility was about 40,000 square foot. New York facility about 250,000 square foot. So stepping up in the responsibility and the complexity of running some of these
Yeah.
operations, which was really neat. And then after that, worked for a company called briefly the Allen Company out in Colorado, and was their head of distribution and logistics for a short time, and then went to XPO Logistics
Mm.
as a project uh, as a project manager, as an implementation PMO manager. So the going to XPO, and there was a common thread through this. The guy I worked with at RailX
Mm.
was another had another Army background, so I kind of when he went to XPO, he was looking for people. I said, oh, I like working with you. Let
Yeah.
me let's see what we can do. And so I got put on one of and this kind of set the stage for PL programs, which was working on a return logistics or reverse logistics facility with XPO, with Nike as the client at the time.
Ah,
And
okay.
this is about a 1.1 million square foot warehouse, very complex, big SAP, kind of dual SAP instance integration, high SKU, high velocity, a lot of headcount, and so a very complex startup. Even though it was a brownfield like outfit, there was still a lot of activity, and that really, again, taking a broad view of the complexity of integrating and starting up these new sites. You get the whole IT aspect, you get a lot of the construction activities that were going on, you get a new automation system that was going in. It was installed by Honeywell Intelligrated.
Mm.
Big testing cycle, a lot of headcount. So I was the primary project manager on the XPO side with that, and then later came back after some other implementations, came back to work at that side as a director ops on the operations side. So kind of got to eat my own dog food with how did you start it up? Was it good? Were the systems sustainable?
Yeah.
Things like that. And then around 2019, I left XPO to start my own business, and really after a couple of different iterations at that, got an independent consulting client doing essentially what I did at XPO, which was warehouse startup PMO. They were starting their first North American distribution center. They needed
Okay.
somebody who had been around the block before. It was a good match, good personality match, and so I helped them start up their North American DC. Along the way, I picked up some additional work from them and their manufacturing partner, and so I had hired a coordinator, hired another project manager for some of this additional work, and that's really where PL program started. Was around 2020 um, with this main kind of anchor client, and then picking up some side projects and additional work along the way. And that brings us to today, where the primary project is, site startup is done. There have been some other projects, site moves, site optimizations, things like that along the way, and now working
Mm.
for the same client on another site. So that's been the path. And now I'm based out of Indiana, just north of Indianapolis.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. And very interesting because you've seen a lot of different sides of the business there, right? And I think it's interesting. The comment you made there about eating your own dog food, right? Is like you
Oh,
went
it's
in and
yeah,
like put the
deeply
solution
important.
and then you had to use it, right? So very interesting perspectives there, and really interesting how you came to start the company, what you're doing now, PO programs. And so tell us a little bit about seeing those different sides of the business, and being in those different roles, and evolving over your career. What do you think kind of now about the current state of the industry? Like what do you think, compared to when you started as that supervisor at Target to where we are now in the industry? What are your thoughts around that?
The so I think it was really helpful to have gone through the different levels of management and different roles,
Mm.
because as a consultant now, it's helpful to be able to say, oh, that's how things are done on the floor. That's how the associates are going to um, interact with this technology, or things you should think about from a just a straight management perspective. But I think from if you look at it just from a purely technological perspective, it's you can have a solution. you should also consider the people, the organization, and from the
Mm.
executive down to the front ranks on how they're going to interact with this solution. So how have things changed over time? I think well, I think that's a tough question. Like a lot of warehouses, when you look at the material handling, modern material studies of automation in warehouses and the set, like there's certain companies that are on the cutting edge of technology and they're pushing the envelope and they're
Mm.
integrating new solutions. And I know XPO makes a big thing about their stance of being very technologically forward, but there are a huge amount of operations that are not. I think something like 60-70% of warehouses are just totally manual. They have forklifts, they have, maybe they're doing contract packaging or something like that, something very manual. And a lot of the fundamentals of warehousing process and people management have not changed.
Mm.
So you still have to know how to manage people. You still have to think about, some basic fundamentals of how do you set up your processes and the steps that a package has to go through from receiving through, stow and put away and then pick, pack, and ship type of operation. So that stuff hasn't changed. I think maybe where you're going is how has automation affected employment and people they're the skill level for the more highly automated facilities is probably going up to manage them and understand and interact with the technology. I think that's a standard
Mm.
answer, but at the same time, technology is abstracting away a lot of the complexity. We do things in software development now that you couldn't do 5 or 10 years ago, just because
Yeah.
or 15 years ago, because the languages have gotten more advanced, the interfaces have gotten more advanced. So I'm not sure it's true to say that these systems will be more complex to manage because that's being considered in the design. I
Mm.
think what you're seeing is that the structurally a lot of the automation is creeping into these little niches where it hadn't before. So it's just becoming more pervasive. So over time, the I don't think you may see some job loss immediately, but it's probably in foreclosed job opportunities. It's not today's jobs that are being lost, but it's tomorrow's. When Target put in a mini
Mm.
load at my building, they said no one's going to lose their jobs. We're going to hire another 50 or 100 people. We're just not
Yeah.
going to build another distribution center or two because of
Interesting.
it.
Okay.
So, this kind of rambling way to get at your question, but the skill level is you may see some higher level talent jobs required on the planning and the management side to manage the technology and some of the strategic issues. You probably won't see a higher skill level required at the user level because the complexity is being abstracted away and handled by the robotics. You will
Mm.
see less headcount, and there are still a lot of places out there that use a lot of manual traditional warehousing processes.
Oh
Okay,
yeah.
that's my spiel. I'm done.
Definitely. No, no. I think that's a really interesting perspective, and I think it really interesting you point out there that hey, like at the Target example, right? To put in the mini load, and they're like, we're actually going to hire more people, but it means we're gonna not going to have another distribution center in the future, right? To expand into and then hire into that. So that's a really interesting perspective. I don't think anybody is really brought up on the podcast before. Certainly, obviously, we've talked about job replacement and things of that nature and what that could potentially look like. But that is an interesting perspective on that. So tell us a little bit about it. You mentioned something there like a couple times around the skills for those leaders to have in these types of operations that are going to be more automated or maybe have more technology involved. So if you look at what qualified someone to be a warehouse supervisor, warehouse manager, ops manager, a couple years ago versus maybe now with a more technology forward distribution center. What are the differences there, and what kind of skill sets do you think someone should be looking to be more robust on to be in these types of operations?
So let's think about what's happening. The some of the aspects of people management are decreasing in these more tech forward operations. So instead of
Mm.
dealing with four shifts of 75 or 80 pickers or something like that, you might be dealing with a goods to person picking system and how to manage it and things of that nature. So maybe you have to be a little less apt at people scheduling, and a little more trained and educated on how to look at the system tools that you have
Mm,
available. So that part's probably pretty obvious. Like I have to read, which machines are available, how are they performing? Is the algorithm going working? Is there anything we need to do to adjust the settings? But I think people are going to have to get more savvy and trained at some problem solving and process and business analysis. On
mm,
the problem solving part, the issues may not be as obvious as, we're missing rate because, Bob and John went to the bathroom when they weren't supposed to, or something like that, or we got to do some coaching and we got to do the people management
mm,
to make sure that we're hitting our rates, or you can't just add more people in some of these situations to make up for deficiencies, or go out and fix some of the inventory problems yourself necessarily.
right.
You're going to have to get more apt at saying, okay, what is the true root cause of some of these issues that we're seeing? Why is the inventory off? What are the upstream contributors to that, and troubleshooting those. The other the other requirement that this technological landscape imposes on leaders, when I say business analysis, that is foreseeing and defining their processes. There's less room for improvising once the system is in place. So you have to explore
Mm,
every nook and cranny of a process, and possible exceptions and scenarios that may happen in the future. This is a realm that was maybe relegated to high level and detailed software development for a long time. Hey, I have to define every little thing that the software is going to do in order
mm,
for it to function properly. What are the edge cases when the software is in this browser and this person's trying to run an ad blocker and put their credit card in, or whatever. Pick your thing, your set of circumstances, what could go wrong. But now, with software running warehouses, ops managers, especially going into design with integrators, automation suppliers, software providers, have to think about, how is this actually going to work? What are the
mm,
exceptions that could happen? How might my business change, and what flexibility might I need to make these things happen? And that requires a different mindset of, okay, I have to explore these options, these scenarios, these permutations of what might happen. Because if you don't, if you just take something that's out of the box, or you don't do a thorough job, you're going to end up in trouble. You're going to
mm.
end up with a different profile that you didn't consider, or an exception scenario you didn't consider, or, oh geez, we wanted to, taking some examples from recent projects, we wanted to be able to modify the order, cancel an order at the dock. Well, then what happens?
Mm.
Or modify something. Well, the robot put it there. A
Yeah.
person didn't put it there. A robot's going to take it away and maybe put it in a truck. Like, where did you think ahead to say we might need to change an order here, and then what happens to the goods?
Mm,
Right? Things like that. So that sort of business analysis and second order thinking, I think, is something that was either not required as much in traditional operations, or you could cope with it. You could say, oh, we didn't
yeah.
think about that. Okay, you know, Paul knows the workaround in the system to do this and that, the other thing. It'll work out okay.
The good
Right?
old workaround. Yeah.
Sure, but you can't work around if there's no workaround
Yeah.
in the system. You're stuck. So
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's such a great point because there is like that traditional like the workaround or like oh so and so knows how to knows how to kind of game it in the system a little bit, right? So we can just make that happen, right? But where you're talking about is with this technology, right? We're getting to a point where it's very like it's very kind of like black and white, right? There is no little gray area where you can kind of move things around, or like you said, like oh we got to cancel this order at the dock, but the robot's expecting to take it, right? And how do we have that contingency in place, or how do we figure out how to navigate through that? So that's a really interesting point there. So I'm curious, with PL programs, tell us a little bit about some recent projects and some of the learnings and takeaways from those projects that you can share with us.
okay, yeah. Due to recency bias, I think I've already shared at least one of those. Every ops manager is going to be
Mm-hmm.
at least in some respects, a software engineer and designer with in the future with some of these systems. and the specification for them, and how you write up essentially the functional spec for how these will
Mm,
behave. What have been some projects recently? We have been working on some automation additions to facilities. Robotic picking, layer picking.
mm,
We've been some looking at automated truck loading in some facilities, which is that's really exciting because that's a really challenging niche to for the robotics to fill, and it's also a depending on exactly how you're doing it, it can be a very difficult and strenuous job.
mm.
So it's really good to see that remembering building walls in target trailers. When people don't have to do that anymore, that'll be great for them.
Yeah.
We've had a couple site startups we've been working, and then actually also help a 3PL with a site move recently. So a couple sites are actually operating. They needed to swap their inventories, and we came in and developed the plan, talked to their
Mm,
clients, helped instill some confidence that this project was under control and that the business would, their business continuity would continue and the inventory wouldn't get all messed up, and then actually helped on the floor with managing that implementation. So a lot of
mm.
that fell in the lap of my senior consultant, Nick DeFlora, who also has 20 years of director level distribution experience. So it's been mostly around site starts,
Mhm.
technology additions, and then where we can help operationally with execution and planning. There are some opportunities with that too.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And I love the automated truck unloading. I think I think I've said that on the podcast multiple times. Is that was long overdue to automate. I think that
Mhm.
that task one of the worst in the warehouse, I'll say. But I'm curious because I've talked to a few 3PLs recently who are growing and they're moving into to new facilities or they're getting an additional facility. And you mentioned there kind of this inventory movement, right? When you go to a new facility or expand facilities within your network, and I've been through a few of those in my career as well, and they're not fun. I'll say they're not fun, and they can be complicated at times, right? And there's a lot of moving pieces to keep track of, and you mentioned the inventory, especially, right? Like, how do you make sure that I'm moving X number of units out of here, and then I'm recovering, X number of units on the other side. So I'm curious, through your experience, what are some of your like top tips or like the one thing you think that maybe is overlooked when you're doing a facility move and moving all of the inventory over?
That is, I guess, the standard line while I'm thinking is that's a good question. But there are a lot of things that go into it. There are a lot of failure points in these projects.
Yeah.
Even for site moves, there are a lot of places where, and maybe the failure is not like binary, where it's like, okay, if I don't do this one thing, the building's going to blow up. But there are a lot of little things where if you don't execute them well, then you could end up with, on the scale of, oh, this spectrum, this is a good project, this is a successful project, and oh boy, this is kind of difficult to live with, but we made it, and oh boy, this is a real
Yeah.
problem in
Kind
business.
of can
Stuff you want to
snowball a
avoid.
little bit. Yeah.
So you have to nail the actual. I think the biggest success contributor is probably planning and if you will prototyping your processes.
Mm,
So you can say, oh, I need the head count, oh, I need the truck, so I need a timeline and make sure I have the labor and things like that. But doing a almost a design session of your process for moving, how you're going to get the inventory out of the physical location and stage it, you know, document your process for how you're going to do this, the system steps along the way, and then do some trial runs, and then check your answers at the other end, check your results, and make sure that you're doing it correctly. Okay, then the challenge is scaling that process with your headcount and your resources available. There's a lot of things that will go into a site move. There may be like inventory
mm,
ownership issues with depending if it's your own business or if you're doing like some sort of vendor managed inventory scheme, or if you're a 3PL moving product from site to site, you also need a fully integrated team. And from a program and a project management perspective, that's one of the most critical factors for overall
mm,
success, whether it's a new site or a move, that you have the right people involved with visibility to the project and how it's going to be conducted. So in a site move, you don't need just the operations team and just the inventory team. You also need to be talking with your IT guys. You also need to be talking with your finance guys. You also need to be talking with, possibly insurance and um, possibly the clients, whoever the ultimate owner of the inventory is, to make sure that they understand what's going to happen. Because each of them may have some other requirements for how this is conducted that you need to identify and then
Mm.
execute on. Okay, and if I, for example, if I'm not doing my system moves correctly, maybe I'm supposed to go between systems, or I'm putting them in the wrong location, or the wrong warehouse code, or something like that. Uh, Things get really hairy really fast, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in these cases. So you bring in the right people, you make sure everybody's informed, you have your communication plan, your stakeholder engagement plan, and then you can execute your process. That the process execution, once all that's lined out, may be the maybe not the easiest part, but the most straightforward part.
Mm.
So first figure out what you need to do and do your design, and then you do it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I think those are great tips there, and I love that you pointed out to make sure the right people are involved, because I think oftentimes some of the, I guess, the others in the organization don't quite understand the depth that goes into making that type of move. Like I did a move before where an IT was not on the same page,
Uh-huh.
and like our Wi-Fi was not fully up, right? So it was like we could only
Oh,
transact off of a hotspot in one corner of the
no,
of the
yeah,
building,
horrible.
right?
Yeah, I'm sure it gave you
Yeah,
nightmares for weeks, right? Or you try to do
yeah,
like an inventory move over like a year-end close or something like that. Your finance guys are going to shoot you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious to that point. At what point, or how do you kind of maybe evaluate internally that maybe we need some external help with a project like that, or any other type of project, and you're that external party, right? So like at what point would you say, like, hey, we actually need somebody that's just going to be dedicated, focused on this, versus like, okay, well, we could handle this internally potentially.
That's a good. I don't know. And I say that
Mm.
because there's a spectrum within every organization of their kind of internal capabilities and their internal resources at any given moment, and then the importance of the project. So if you have a large new site, a marquee site that is
Hmm.
going to be stood up with new technology and a new team in a new place, that's very high risk. That's a very high risk project.
Mm.
And if you don't have the people on board, you probably want that's probably a clear candidate for bringing in outside help to set up the program, to give input on the design, to help with the testing, and help stand up the organization and things like that. So if you don't have the expertise in house, or then that's a clear need. But if you're somebody like Amazon or a Walmart who puts up a warehouse every other week, and you have dedicated
Yeah.
teams for the real estate and the IT, and you have a fully formed playbook, yeah, maybe there might be some one-off cases where you bring in
Mm.
outside help, but there's probably not a need. So when an organization's thinking about when they need outside help, it is probably they don't have the expertise in house. They're facing new situations, whatever that might be, and then the big sticker, as you mentioned, is whether the existing resources can handle it.
Hmm.
I'd say that that bar is a lot lower or a lot higher than most people think, because a lot of people are trying to manage a day job,
Yeah.
and they already have, you're dealing with task switching and attention. And if you have an important project, it's very difficult to give it full attention. So Amazon started with their major programs doing, single threaded leader philosophy. Like, you're not handling six things. You're handling this one important thing. You are the guy.
Mm.
Okay, maybe some of the people on the project are working on multiple things, but you're the responsible party. So there are definitely cases where, based on the priority and the resource availability, that programs and companies should consider bringing in the external help. Okay,
Mm.
I don't know that there's like a hard rule, like, hey,
Yeah.
it's Tuesday, I have six people on the team, and the building's this size, and I had a matrix of availability, and when Jimmy's going on vacation, so, oh yeah, we need another person. But if somebody's feeling uneasy about their workload or the novelty and difficulty of a project, then
Mm.
it's time to really seriously consider it, and sooner rather than later, so you don't find yourself behind the eight ball and late, trying to make up a resource constraint on a big initiative, because
Mm.
things balls will start dropping, and those that has very expensive effects down the line.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and interesting points there, and great advice too on how to kind of evaluate that internally for your organization. So now you wrote two books as well. So let's talk a little bit about those. So I guess tell us a little bit. Well, I guess tell us what the books are and what they're about, and kind of why did you decide to write them too?
Why write a book? Sure.
Yeah.
The first was called Practical Floor Supervision, and that
Mm,
is my book on how to be a warehouse supervisor. And I
nice.
wrote it. I wrote it coming out of Amazon. I went to RailX, starting up a facility in Florida, and the organization was not mature as far as its training pipeline for supervisory leadership.
Mm,
So I found myself giving a lot of instruction from things I had learned at Amazon, at Target, other places, reading to my supervisors. And I said, I was looking for training materials for these guys or something I could
mhm,
build a curriculum off of. And there was really no, there was a book from 1983 on how to build be a warehouse supervisor. It's out of print. It's got, kind of crinkly pages. It's only available in hard copy
mm,
on Amazon if you can find a copy. And it was quite dated in a lot of ways. So I said, okay, I'm going to write a little handbook on how to do this job, specifically for the people doing this job, and maybe the ops managers if you're looking to train or evaluate how the supervisors are doing.
yeah.
So that became Practical Floor Supervision. I spent, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, something like that, writing the book, and then put together my cover and PowerPoint and self-published on Amazon, and you too can buy a copy and learn how to be a warehouse supervisor.
Definitely.
It was actually used in the Auburn Harvard Business School, or School of Business. I forget the exact name, but one of their supply chain professors, David Strickland, picked it up and used it as a curriculum for his supply chain students to say this is kind of like what's
Mm,
required on this job. When you go out into
yeah.
the world in a job like this, here are the things to think about and how to do it. The Which was really cool. Got to talk to a bunch of college students about being a warehouse supervisor. So that was neat.
Yeah. I love that.
Then the second book was on called Practical Performance Management and setting up and designing performance management, standards for, and how to run the management program for hourly or direct associate productivity.
Okay.
So like how do you set a numerical goal and a standard
Mm,
for people to hit? Is it fair? Is it valid? Do you do it with kind of a set of pure rates, or do you do an engineered standard? What are the pros and cons of each? How do you do it? And then how do you set up the management scaffolding and the system to make sure that you are enforcing it consistently, fairly, that you have the right, in you have productivity over here, and you maybe have some counterbalancing metrics over here of quality and safety that you have to consider. So how do you
mm.
tie that together in one performance management program, and administer it effectively? Which is something that I think a lot of organizations have figured out a way to do it, but there's very little codified about how it's done. So there may be, sites may come up with their own performance reviews or their own tracking or this, that, or the other thing, but it's every site's different, and a lot of the actual administration of performance management, the uh, the particulars of it, especially at smaller companies, are just not well defined, and that can result in like unfairness to the associates,
Yeah.
loss of efficiency and productivity capture for the business, things like that. So that's what the book's about.
Yeah. Very interesting, and I think great topics to write on as well, because I think that and one I love that that professor is using the one book. I gotta think about that for my students too as well, because I think that gives a great glimpse at like what do these roles look like, because I know I see that that my students that come in, like they're supply chain majors, and 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 the one thing I always ask them is like, well, what do you want to do in supply chain? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like just work in supply chain. And I'm like, well,
What
there's
does
a
that mean?
ton
There's
of
a lot of
different
options.
jobs. Yeah, there's a ton of different jobs you could do in supply chain. You got to figure out one or two areas maybe that you want to go and focus on. They're like, oh, I just want an internship, and I'm like, well, what kind of internship do you want to be in a warehouse this summer, or do you want to be in an office
Yeah,
this
planner,
summer,
trucking, or
right?
whatever, blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
the
So,
result was not uniformly positive. Most I
mm,
got a lot of positive feedback from the students, like, "Oh, I didn't know this about safety or productivity," but I got one review
yeah.
that stuck in my mind, and the gist of it was a 1-star review on Goodreads, and the student wrote something like, "I only read this because my teacher made me." And imagine how fun working in a warehouse sounds. Now imagine how fun reading a book about working in a warehouse.
That's
Okay,
pretty
all right,
good.
you're being honest, you're being genuine.
Yeah, yeah, it's fair. Yeah. Very interesting, and I love that you've created these resources for the industry, or people that maybe are interested in getting into the industry, and I think that's a great thing to do. And so you built another tool as well called Simple Dim Presentations, which is pretty interesting and something I think that I would have liked to have when I was an ops manager. So tell us a little bit about that and the pain point that you're solving there, because I think it is one that people probably don't think about like consciously, but it is a pain definitely, that you face from time to time.
Yeah. The so what Simple Dim does, and Simple Dimension is what it's from, is it's meant to give extend PowerPoint with some dimension and scale drawing
Mm,
capability. So right now you just drop a box in and you have the ruler across the top and the side, and you drop a box and you're like, that's about the size of this thing, and you can make some rough block diagrams if you're doing a layout
mm,
or so on. And the need that I found was I found myself doing conceptual diagrams of things like conveyance connections and warehouse layouts in PowerPoint to express an idea, but it would have been much better and more effective if these things had been to scale with units.
mm,
Okay, and maybe at the time I didn't have um, AutoCAD or access to person with AutoCAD, or I wanted to put it in a PowerPoint file to share with people. And
mm,
so I, with the advent of our favorite large language models, I said, oh, I'm going to try to make something that lets me just put a scale on some of these slides, so I don't have to manually calculate that 1 inch in the PowerPoint scale is equal to 30 feet, and therefore this warehouse footprint should
mm,
be, so many inches by so many inches. So I started out wanting to make just a linear and area dimension tool, and eventually built it into something that lets you do scaled dimension drawings in PowerPoint. So you can set a scale on each slide. You say 1 inch on the ruler equals 100 feet, and then you can tell that I want
mm,
a box or a rectangle that's 700 feet by 300 feet, and then I want to create little shapes inside it and make arrays and offsets and maybe do layouts to scale in
mm,
PowerPoint, which is a nice, I think, for the ops manager and for like a supply chain consultant wanting to do a conceptual drawing but have it be to scale in units. It's a powerful tool because it gets you out of a $2,000 a year AutoCAD license and then having to learn AutoCAD, and maybe like we talked briefly earlier, you don't have to go to the guy Bob who has the AutoCAD license in your
yeah.
company and get on his agenda for your site or area layout or things like that. Like, you can do it yourself for the
Mm,
most part. So that's what it was. I was doing some drawings. I said it would be really handy to be able to do this with, make it look real, and so that's what I built the tool for.
mm. Yeah, and I think that's fantastic because I think it is, like you said, oftentimes it's kind of like, oh well, I don't know CAD, and I got to go find somebody that does, or that has the program even, right? And sometimes you're, as like an ops manager, if you're looking like at from like a continuous improvement kind of mindset, you kind of just want to noodle around sometimes on
Mhm.
some things, right? And you don't want to go grab somebody to just be like, hey, this idea, and then
Yeah. What if
after a
we put
while,
this?
like,
What if we put receiving this type of good over here and this one over here, and how would it
yeah,
look? Will it fit? Oh, the forklifts have to go over here. Or all sorts of different scenarios for doing that, or even just like, hey, we should do our pallet storage differently, or the rack profiles would look like this if we did it differently. You don't want to necessarily go through someone for that, or if they give you a drawing, you don't want to have to maybe you take their outline and drop it into PowerPoint, and you say, oh, I can play with this and make it look different.
Yeah.
So there's a yeah, you're right. It's a little bit of a niche thing, but I think anybody who's found themselves doing layouts in like Excel, like making each block
Mm.
equal, a foot square, as
Yeah.
my friend
I've done
Brian
that.
Curry
Yeah.
says, sad CAD, um, then this is probably a good option.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I love that, and I think it's really interesting tool, definitely to be able to utilize and just kind of do a little playing around, little brainstorming before you want to go full on with like throwing your idea out there to the crowd a little bit. I think that's a really smart way to approach it. So now as we kind of close out our conversation here, and it's been fantastic to speak with you and kind of tap into some of your knowledge and insights from the industry. I have to ask you, you've seen a lot in the industry, and you're working on projects now that are looking at some of the latest tech in the industry as well. But if you look towards the future of warehousing and distribution itself, what is kind of your one prediction that you think the future of warehousing will look like?
I oh, asking to tell the future. Oh boy.
Look at
Okay.
that crystal ball. Yeah.
Yeah, stock answers would be something like, oh, AI is going to eat everything, and you're going to see more automation penetration
Mm,
and so on. I think you see. I think you're still going to see a lot of kind of that lower unautomated side of the warehouse spectrum that's going to continue to remain unautomated.
mm,
That lower 50 or 60%. I think the big challenge is going to be integrating these systems, and anybody who can crack the code on like really effective cross-platform integration is going to be that to me that's the game changer. It's not necessarily one piece of tech or one robotic arm or one truck unloading. Like all that stuff's going to crash on those different
mm,
processes, within a few years of each other. But the challenge is always going to be this integration, the pain of putting these systems together and having them run effectively. So if somebody can cross or figure out a very agnostic platform integration tool or way to do that, I think that's how you tap into that lower, call it lower, less automated set of warehouses, at least the ones that aren't structurally automated by the
mm.
or unautomated by the types of their work. So where do you say the next like 10 or 15 years? I'd say someone's going to take a crack at that, and if they do that, they're going to be a really dominant player in automation and then warehousing as a whole. So
Mm.
that's where's that going to go? Somebody's going to crack the integration piece.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I think that's a great point because you look at that lower end of the spectrum, like you said, that's unautomated, and they need kind of they need simple and low resource way to integrate, right, and bring in these systems to make them viable for themselves. I think because
Mhm.
they don't have the R&D department or the engineering department and all these different things to be able to look at that. And I think that's a really interesting prediction there. So
Yeah,
we'll
they're
see.
they're trying
Yeah,
to get they're trying to get labels from their customers in the right format, right?
yeah,
Like, and you start talking, and it's like, well, how do we get this access to this new tech? It's somebody's got to figure out a very easy way to introduce the tech, and then that's going to unlock that market.
yeah. Absolutely. So, really interesting to talk to you here, Paul. And if somebody comes up with that integration piece, let me and Paul know. I'm sure we'll probably invest maybe and ride along with you. But great to talk to you today, Paul, and really interesting to hear kind of your perspectives and your insights on the industry. And if people are looking to get in touch with you, they want to learn more about PL programs, your books, or the Simple Dim presentations tool, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, that's LinkedIn. You can find me or warehouseimprovement.com for the PL programs.
Amazing domain. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fitting. That's for the program and the project management. And then SimpleDim is just at simpledim.com. And and I'm always, of course, available at on LinkedIn or Paul at plprograms.com. Love to chat with people about what they're seeing and how they're doing things. So, and Kevin, by the
All
way,
right.
you're doing a great job too. You're the way you're doing the pod. Saw your safety report. You're
Thank you.
hands out and a big hand to you for the efforts you're putting in.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And yeah, if you haven't checked out the safety report, make sure you do. But make sure you connect and follow Paul on LinkedIn as well. He gives some great insights and posts there all the time. I really enjoy them myself. And we'll definitely put all the information about everything else Paul and PL programs related at the newwarehouse.com, as well as in these show notes here. So Paul, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Kevin, great talking with you. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.